Well, ladies and gentlemen, again, like I said before, not another year would be complete at the KitchenAid Cooking Theater without some of our favorites from the Spice House. The owners of the Spice House, with 4 different locations, just celebrated 61 years in the spice business. Second-generation spice merchants. They've been featured on TV and radio programs for their expert knowledge of the spice world. The Spice Award winners find their passion in educating the world on their craft. Please welcome Patty and Tom Erd.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. As he mentioned, this is my family business of 61 years. We took over the business from my parents about 26 years ago. So it's been a good long learning experience for us. We were named recently to Food and Wine's top spice shops in the world. So that was a very cool accolade. Thank you. We're going to talk about spices and spices in the big picture of things. And I know we talk a lot about trends at the Housewares show and everybody wants trends. But if we were to go back in time 500 years and tell you the next trend would be that people would be cooking every day with spices, you would all boo me out of the theater because people didn't really cook with spices 500 years ago. Spices were very, very valuable and they were used at periods of time as currency. If you would go back into the 1400s, a pound of nutmeg could be traded for 7 fat oxen.
Fat ones. Whoop.
You're pretty loud.
Fat ones.
But
Turn me down.
So we know spices have a long history of currency. People paid their rents in peppercorn, where we get the term of peppercorn rent from. So spices very often were as valuable, if not more valuable, than gold. Spices also had a long history of medicinal use, right? I mean, we think about pharmaceutical companies are relatively recent in the invention of the world, but spices were our medicine for thousands and thousands of years, and I think we're kind of finding that is turning around again. We drink a paste of turmeric and ginger every morning because it's a strong anti-inflammatory, and we tend to think it works.
Spices were also used in religious ceremonies. Whenever you sacrifice something to God, the smoke had to smell good. Otherwise, God wouldn't look down on you. And what better thing to throw on the fire than some sweet-smelling tree bark? It worked really good.
Spices were also considered aphrodisiacs, which pretty much every spice and every herb is considered an aphrodisiac. We think that might be really good marketing on the part of early spice merchants. We're not really sure that's true or not. And the last thing we don't think about is before running water, people didn't smell very good. So spices were the deodorizing factors. And if you'd be in a room like this, you'd be back in maybe the 1200s in England, people would strew fresh thyme or rosemary and it would be on your chairs or on your mats and you'd sit on it and that smell would kind of waft up and the room would smell a lot better. So at any rate, we are going to, again, thinking about spices in the big picture, we could talk about a lot of trending spices, but as fast as those come in, they go out. So we always find it a little safer to talk about what we consider the master spices in the spice trade. So we are going to talk about those today. And while we're not doing any cooking, if you sit through our whole talk, we have a lovely little spice gift for you as a temptation. And we're going to start with the king of spice. So what would you think would be the king of spice? Take a guess.
Me.
He's delusions of grandeur. He thinks he's the king of spice.
Pepper. Yeah, there's more pepper growing on the planet than all the other spices put together. It's indigenous to this western coast of India right here. It's been transplanted to Indonesia and some grows here in South America, but it's a very, very tropical plant. It'll only grow plus or minus 15 degrees of the equator. So very tropical. You can't grow pepper in Florida. Too cold. Okay. So pepper, it's just a berry. It hangs on a vine. Think of little grapes. That's what it's like. And like other berries, early in the season, they start out and they're green. You know, because they're immature, they're green, and if we pick them at that point, we have green peppercorns. Okay, so these are just immature pepper. If we leave them on the vine longer, like any other berry, they turn red. But these get kind of a dark reddish brown. And if we pick them at that point and lay them in the sun to dry, they get even darker and the skins wrinkle up. Think of raisins. And that's what we call black pepper. Okay? So it'd be the raisins of the pepper plant. If we take black pepper and we soak it in water, the outside shell swells up, and you can rub the shell off. And what's left is the inside, white pepper. So it's all the same plant. Now, anthropologists figure that people have been trading pepper since about 1000 BC. And back then, the Manaeans and the Nabateans down here at the bottom of Africa, they controlled the spice trade. They figured out how to get to India and back, and then go up the Red Sea and trade to the Europeans for a lot of money. This is way before oil wells. And that's how they made their living. So by the time the pepper got to Europe, it was very, very expensive. Only rich people had pepper. And of course, the royalty had pepper, and also the clergy had pepper. So these Arab merchants were never going to tell the Europeans that these two were the same plant. No, you like this one more? This is very rare, very expensive. You had to pay a whole lot more for this one because the Europeans liked it more. You know. They still do. You know, you go to France and they want to use, the chefs want to use white pepper a lot. You know, you don't want to see it in the food. You know, Chinese chefs too. A lot of times they'll use white pepper far more than black pepper. This black stuff, this is for those crude Americans. Yeah. So Europeans always thought that the two were different plants until the 13th century. There was a friar in France. His name was Bartholomeus.
So he would be a French friar?
A French friar, yes. And
sorry, there's no good jokes in the spice business.
So Bartholomeus, remember, he's clergy. He's clergy, right? So he's got black ones and white ones. And Bartholomeus is a little bit of a scientist. He's cutting open the black peppercorns and looking at the cross section. And he cuts open the white peppercorns and he looks at the cross section. And what's the only difference between the two? The outer black shell. That's the only difference. So Bartholomeus figures, he goes, well, this must be the same plant. The insides are exactly the same. They taste alike. The only difference is this outer black shell. So Bartholomeus writes a letter to the bishop. And the Catholics found this letter in an old abbey in France. I don't have the exact translation, but it goes along these lines. Bartholomew says, Mr. Bishop, it must be that in the land where the peppercorn trees grow, you know, he didn't know it was a vine. The peppercorn tree forests must be infested with serpents, snakes, you know, and the people can't get into the forest to harvest the peppercorns. So they set the forest on fire, and that drives out the snakes. And then when the fire burns out, they go into the forest and they harvest the pepper. And the pepper that gets burnt is the black one. And the pepper that escapes the flames is the more expensive white one. Well, that made perfect sense. These got toasted. That's why they're black on the outside. You know? So 300 years go by, and that's what Europeans think is the difference between white pepper and black pepper. It's the old serpent problem. You know? Until 1497, 5 years after Columbus, Portuguese fellow Vasco da Gama gets all the way around Africa. You know, Columbus went this way. Da Gama goes this way and gets to India. He's got 3 ships, a bunch of stuff to trade. He brings back white ones, black ones, green ones to Europe. And he tells the Europeans, hey, you guys, they're all the same plant. They just process them different. And Da Gama goes from here to here without these pesky middlemen in the way. And the price comes way down. And now regular people could afford pepper for the first time in history, 5 years after Columbus.
So we really enjoy the stories that the Arabs told. They're very entertaining. And this is about cassia cinnamon. This is a big, giant piece of cassia bark. See, it's hard like wood. It's tree bark. So according to the Arabs, this only grew in the mountains of Bacchus. And Bacchus is the god of what? wine and revelry. So this made sense because when wine was first created, it wasn't so wonderfully refined as it is today. So very often they masked the flavor of wine by adding spices, and cinnamon would be at the top of that list. So it became more palatable. So this grew only in the mountains of Bacchus. No man could reach these mountains, but there were gigantic birds that would fly into the mountains. They'd gather these sticks, they'd bring it back to the valley where the natives lived and there was water, and they would build their nests out of these big cinnamon sticks. Well, the natives devised a ruse where they would lay out donkey carcasses. So the birds must have been like giant pterodactyls because they were carnivorous. They would take the donkey carcasses up to the nest. The weight of the donkey meat would cause the sticks to start to crack, and eventually the sticks would come tumbling down. The natives would rush in at great peril to their lives. And gosh, that's why you're going to have to pay a lot of gold for cinnamon, right? Makes sense? A couple people got gobbled up by the birds every time, so you had to pay a lot. When I say cassia cinnamon, in our store we actually stock 4 different types of cassia and cinnamon from 4 different parts of the world, and each has a different terroir to it. But this is where you take over.
Oh, yeah. Most of the cinnamon in this continent in the 21st century is this variety. And you've seen this before, right? Cinnamon sticks. Okay, it does not grow in the mountains of Bacchus. It grows here in Indonesia. And in Indonesia, we cut the bark off the branches with a curved knife. And then we lay it in the sun to dry. And then as it dries, it curls up. Think of like a birch tree. You know how the bark comes off a birch tree and it curls up? This stuff does the same thing. So when you look at a cinnamon stick, it's just a piece of tree bark that's curled up. And it's real long, like this. And then we just run it through a saw and we cut it. That's why the ends are straight. God doesn't make the ends straight, you know. Or we can cut it. We can cut it short, you know, like you get in the grocery store like these, you know. Or that's a 3-inch. This is a 4-inch. This is a 12-inch. We can cut it anywhere we want. So cinnamon is just tree bark. Then what's ground cinnamon? Sawdust. That's right. It's ground up wood. Okay? So tree bark, ground tree bark. Okay? Now we're going to pass this around. We're going to pass this around, and the way to do this is you just put some on your hand like this. Don't be bashful. Tap your finger on it, taste it, and then right on the floor. Keep the place smelling good, okay?
You can just
right
pass
on
it
your
around.
hand. Right, pass it around. Keep it going. Right on the floor.
There you go.
There you going. You got one. Okay.
Keep in mind.
Now,
this
I'm going
is
to keep talking.
This is our
Okay?
most ordinary cinnamon. You're going to taste
Yeah.
one a little better in
Okay.
a minute.
Now, the tree that this comes from, like Patty said, is called Cinnamomum cassia, C-A-S-S-I-A. Sometimes you see that in recipes. Use cassia bark or cassia cinnamon. That's the name of the tree, the Latin term for the tree. This was not the first stuff to get to Europe. It comes from way too far away, Indonesia. The first stuff to get to Europe was this one. And this one is called Cinnamomum zeylanicum, which is the Latin term for the cinnamon from Ceylon. Ceylon is this big island off the coast of India here, this pink spot here. Nowadays, we call it Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka occurs on the planet twice, once here and once here. That keeps the price down. Now, in Sri Lanka, the plants grow different. It's more like a big bush. And we cut the whole bush off about a foot from the ground so that it regrows. It just grows on public land. Like okay, here, if I want to go fishing on a public lake, what do I buy? I buy a fishing license, okay? In Sri Lanka, if I want to go harvest some cinnamon, I buy a cinnamon license. And they just harvest it right off the public land. And the rule is that you got to leave it, you know, about a foot from the ground so that it regrows. So anyway, so then they take the whole bush and they take it back to their hut, turn on a little music, And they sit around and they peel this real thin bush bark off the branches. And again, they lay it in the sun to dry like they do in Indonesia. But this stuff is so thin, it's like thick paper, that they'll lay 4 or 5 sheets on top of each other. And then they all curl up. So when you look at Ceylon cinnamon, it's more like a big long cigar, like there's many, many layers inside it. Now we're gonna pass this around. Now smell it where I broke it, okay? Or where Patty broke it. That's how you can tell. Smell where I broke it and pass it to your neighbor. Okay, keep it going, keep it going. Here's some for you. Smell it where I broke it, there. Pass it over. You can see how different it is. It's the same genus, Cinnamomum, different species, okay? So same family of trees, little different smell. Now, in the spice trade, we grade cinnamon. Keep listening, okay? We grade cinnamon, and the way we grade cinnamon is by the oil content. How much oil's in it? When I talk about oil, I'm talking about volatile oil. Volatile oil reacts with air, gets in our nose. Okay, that's what we taste. The cinnamon that you're sniffing now, 1.5% volatile oil. Okay, the one you tasted before from Indonesia, 2.5% volatile oil. This stuff is macho cinnamon. This is 6% volatile oil. This comes from Vietnam and southern China right here. Now we're going to pass some of this around and do the same thing. Right in your hand, pass it to your neighbor, and keep it going, okay? And see if you can tell the difference. It should be like night and day. There. Go and then pass it that way.
Here's the Vietnamese cinnamon. Take that from you. So you're tasting a much richer, spicier. It's got a very high oil content. We never say one cinnamon is better than the others because it's all very subjective. But we can tell you that we sell way more of the cinnamon you're tasting now than any of our other cashew cinnamons. We probably grind 100 pounds of that cinnamon in every store every week. And when the man goes down in the basement, he comes back after a couple hours to get his 100 pounds. And he is the best smelling a man will ever be. But the next day he might have to take the whole afternoon and grind pepper. And we say when that man goes home, he always gets his own row on the train because whoever sits next to him doesn't know why they're sneezing, but they can't stop sneezing because he's covered with invisible pepper dust. So one of the funnest things we had happen to us is we had the one and only Julia Child visit us in our Milwaukee shop. And we were super excited because we just gained access to this Vietnamese cinnamon. The trade doors were closed for 2 decades at least after the war, and it didn't mean the cinnamon wasn't there. We just did not have access to it. So we were so excited to show Julia Child this new amazing cinnamon. And I had a piece of bark like this, again, hard like wood. And I was like, Julia, we have this amazing cashew cinnamon. She took this piece of bark like this out of my hand and took a giant bite out of it.
Yeah. We wanted her to taste like you guys, a little on the hand like this. No.
And my family is rarely at a loss for words, but we all collectively sucked in our breath and went, oh! So do you want to spit that out? But to her credit, she kept chewing and chewing and chewing and chewing. It seemed like, to us, like an eternity, but like 10 minutes. Finally was able to swallow it, and she said something. She was very charming. She said something like, oh, my dear, that was absolutely delightful. Thank you for sharing. So I have a piece of cinnamon signed by Julia Child that says, Bon Appetit, Julia Child, one of my treasured possessions. So another thing that we don't think about much because we're in the business for culinary application, but as we were talking about spices and medicine, one summer everyone was buying cinnamon, which is not a normal time for people to be buying cinnamon. And finally we looked online to see what was going on, and there was a couple of medical studies from Rutgers and Johns Hopkins about cinnamon and type 2 diabetes and also lowering cholesterol. So for us, it's kind of a bonus when you have something that actually tastes good. Like I said, the turmeric and the ginger we drink every morning, it doesn't taste all that good. But cinnamon, if you put something like was it a half teaspoon or a quarter teaspoon?
Quarter teaspoon.
Quarter teaspoon in your it's so easy to get half a teaspoon incorporated into your diet in your morning tea or your morning coffee, or he puts it on his fresh fruit. So it's a nice bonus. And another spice we know for medicinal application.
Another spice known since antiquity is ginger. Anthropologists have found ginger in Chinese tombs that are over 3,000 years old. Now, the Chinese didn't put ginger in their ancestors' tombs so that they'd have something to snack on in the afterworld. They put ginger in their ancestors' tombs so that they would have medicine in the afterworld. Ginger is very, very good for the common cold. It's also very good for stomach ailments. Anything that ails the tummy, it's very good for. Apparently, 3,000 years ago in southern China, they had colds and tummy aches. And ginger is very effective. Ginger is an alkali, so it neutralizes stomach acid quickly, fast, like bang, right now, you know. So it's very effective. There's no more ginger growing wild on the planet. It's all cultivated. We know that it's indigenous to southern China, but by the time man learned to write, which is, I don't know, somewhere about 2,000 BC, it had already passed through Indochina, had gotten to India, where the first writings were, and it was growing there, and it was part of their medicine at that point, 2000 BC. From there, it kept going. It got to this part of Africa. When the Romans came down the Red Sea, they were getting ginger from the Horn of Africa here, and that was 100 BC already. So then the Romans took it up the Mediterranean and passed it and spread it all through Europe.
So we do know that the Romans get a lot of credit for spreading different foodstuffs through Europe. Lemons would be another one. But they found a baker in Rhodes. They sailed into this bakery, and they were super excited because they'd heard from the previous sailors that the baker had invented this exciting new taste sensation, and basically it was bread flavored with ginger. So the baker was very clever because the ginger made a delicious flavored bread, but what amazed them is that weeks later the bread had not deteriorated.
Uh-oh, you're out.
I'm out? No,
Oh,
there we
you
go.
are.
So the ginger made the bread shelf stable, so you could have it for weeks. And we even know that our American revolutionaries had ginger in their rations, which made sense because, again, it's good for upset stomachs,
Medicine.
which guys at war probably have. So another thing that was interesting is Queen Elizabeth I had a custom that when she had a very elaborate feast at the palace, at the very end of it, her royal baker would make a gingerbread lord or lady in your likeness, which is pretty cool because this is before the days of cameras even. So we have many, many pastry chefs as customers, but I just can't get anyone to do that for me when I have a party. But I think Queen Elizabeth probably had a little more money than I had to purchase that.
Yeah. The Romans also took, you know, like Patty said, they took it to England, and the English are real fond of this. You know, if you have red hair in England, you know, it's ginger hair because of your fiery temperament. Also, in the Middle Ages, the pub keepers would keep ginger behind the bar, and when somebody had a tummy ache or a cold, the ginger would come out and it would get put into your beer, and then a warm poker came out of the fire. They warmed it up, and you drank that, and your cold would feel better, or your tummy would feel better, and that's where we get the term ginger ale. Because it was ginger ale at that point.
I always think as the wife, though, if you have the flu or a cold, why are you going to the bar? And the husband says, well, that's where the medicine is.
That's where the medicine is. That's right.
And conveniently, it gets mixed into beer.
Yeah. And British doctors love to use this stuff. There was, you know, in the Middle Ages, all doctors were herbal doctors. There was no pharmaceutical companies. So there was this one doctor, his name was Culpeper. And Culpeper wrote this big book, and he described all the plants that he used, because doctors only had plants, parts of animals, or minerals to use for medicine. So Dr. Culpeper writes this book, and in there, I mean, in there he would describe the medicinal plants and how he used them. And Dr. Culpeper was prescribing ginger for you know, tummy aches and colds, and also to his female patients who were weak in the sports of Venus. which is a proper British euphemism. So the British were using it for far more than just colds and tummy aches.
As I said earlier, spices were considered strong aphrodisiacs, and this has been my family business my whole life. My husband and I have been married, like 35 years or something like that, and we are surrounded by spices every day. Our house smells like spices, our car, our cat, but oddly enough, we do not have any children. So we think that, again, that was good marketing and good propaganda on the part of early spice merchants.
Yeah. We were talking with a group a few years back, and one lady says, well, you have to do more than just eat the spices.
I'm going to pass around, this is candied ginger, and candied or crystallized ginger means it's been cooked in sugar water several times, so you want to bypass this if you can't have sugar, but this is absolutely one of our best-selling things in the store. We sell hundreds of pounds pretty much every week, I think.
Careful, strong aphrodisiac.
Right, and it's only Monday. So I don't think we have time to do nutmeg, so we want to allow for some questions. So we can skip ahead to...
you want to go to... Oh, I don't know. Where's the pictures?
Oh, I don't know where the pictures are. They're probably back in the box. But anyway, that's fine.
Go get the box.
No, So now we're in the 1400s, and Cortez is exploring Mexico, and he is supposed to bring back things of value for the king and queen of Spain, who are in several wars. And he gets into Mexico, and he sees that the natives there are wearing lots of silver and turquoise in their clothing, and he's very excited, and he thinks maybe he hit the jackpot. But when he gets to the coffers of the treasury, he doesn't find gold or silver or valuable gems. He finds a bunch of these things, and then he finds these big kind of hairy orange pods that he thinks are related to coconuts because they look alike, but these things end up being what? Vanilla and cacao.
Cocoa.
So imagine prior to the 1500s in Europe, there was no vanilla and there was no chocolate. So in retrospect, this wasn't what he was looking for, but it was a really amazing find. And back then, there was always a botanist on the ship, so they were much more connected to the earth. So they knew not to just take what was in the treasury, they knew they needed to find the plants that grew these so they could take these back and possibly the Spanish could sell them to some colonies. And that's what they did. However, vanilla is an orchid flower. So vanilla is a very, very difficult plant. If anyone grows orchids, to get orchids to flower is no easy feat.
Yeah, it's a vine, and the vine grows real easy and pretty quickly, but it's hard to get the flowers. Now, if you get the vanilla flowers to open, they're only open for one day, and they close up and they fall off. If they're pollinated that one day, they'll close up and the fruit comes out underneath. The fruit is a green bean. On the vine, they're green. Excuse me. Then when they get to a certain when they get to a certain length, they pick the beans and they lay them in the sun to dry. But there's a problem, because if you just lay fruit in hot sun to dry, it just dries up and gets crispy. And you don't want that. You want them to be, you want them to be pliable like that. So they discovered, this is way before Cortez got there, they discovered that if you take the beans out of the sun and you wrap them in the burlap mats that they were sitting on, and you put them in wooden boxes and put a cover on the box at night, the cold air rolls in off the ocean, and you got cold air on the outside and warm beans on the inside of the box. And that creates condensation. They get damp. Then in the morning, they take the damp beans out of the box and lay them back out in the sun. Then at night, they wrap the they wrap the dry beans up, put them back in the box. They get damp again. Then the next morning, they put them out
I think
again.
they get the idea.
This goes on for 6 months. 6 months they do this, and very slowly the green beans turn to black or to brown, and you have the vanilla of trade. On the vine, they have no flavor. So they have to go from green to brown over that 6-month period and proper curing before they develop that flavor and aroma, and they're stable for trade. How did they figure that out? I don't know. But they were doing it a long time before Columbus and Cortez.
We're going to take questions in just like 3 minutes. Even the Chicago Botanic Garden has a vanilla that's about to bloom right now, a vanilla orchid that's, if anyone is local.
Yeah, but you got to be there. You got to be there on that day
right.
to see it open. So then the Spanish brought the vines brought the vines back to Spain, and the Spanish, like, what am I going to do with this stuff, Cortez? Well, sell it to the French. The French loved this stuff. So they sold the vines to the French, who really loved it. I mean, you still hear the term French vanilla, right? But you can't grow orchids at this latitude. Look where you are. Okay? Orchids are very tropical. They only grow down here. So the Spanish, or the French, took them to some colonies they had down here called the Bourbon Islands. They were named after the kings of the day. The kings, their last name was Bourbon, or Bourbon, they would say in France. So these were called the Bourbon Islands. The French brought them here. They planted the whole northeast coast of Madagascar in vanilla vines. And now, Madagascar is responsible. It's 70% of the world's crop comes out of Madagascar. But there was a problem. The orchids only open for one day. In Mexico, there was a tiny little bee that you could hardly see, a millipone bee, that was going around and doing his job. Well, when they took the vines to Spain and France, and from France to Madagascar, the little bee didn't make the trip. So the flowers would just open up and close and fall off, no fruit. So one day, this is another love story, but I won't get into it. One of the Malagasy discovers that if he touches the inside of the vanilla orchid with a stick, and he touches the inside of another vanilla orchid with the same stick, something happens, and the vanilla orchid closes up, and the fruit comes out from underneath. The vanilla beans grow from underneath. Now, they didn't know what they were doing, but they kept doing it. And now, each and every vanilla orchid on the day it's open gets hand-pollinated with a little stick to make sure that you get the valuable vanilla beans coming out from underneath. What a great job. That's what I'm going to do when I retire. I'm going to be a vanilla orchid pollinator. Go around it.
This is the same person that complains about how hot it is in the summer, so I don't quite see that happening. So one spice more expensive than vanilla, does everyone know what that would be? Saffron. This also happens to come from Spain. So Spain had some good spices for a while. If it takes up to 5 to 8 years for the vanilla crop to get harvested, does saffron take 10 years? Does it take longer? It actually doesn't. It's a fall blooming crocus, Crocus sativas. It's one of the only spices you grow right here in Chicago if you had the right bulb, which is not easy to source. But it blooms in the fall. It's got 3 tiny threads in each flower, and
the stigma. That's the saffron, the little stigma inside the flower.
So to fill this 1 pound box, it takes about 250,000 flowers, and every little thread is picked by hand, and there's no machine that can do it. There's not likely to ever be a machine that can do it. So in Spain, they kind of turn it into a festival, and first they just pick all the flowers and they lay them on tables, and then they pick the little stigmas out of the flowers.
Make a little pile in front of them, and they have a little contest, who can make the biggest pile.
So we have several.
The women and the children are the best. Men won't do it. Our fingers are too big. We can't get in there. The kids are the best because they got the little fingers. They can get in there and get it.
So we have several types of saffron. This is called coupe. Coupe is the highest grade of saffron. It's got all red threads. That's where the most flavor is. Even though you think of saffron as turning your food yellow, the red threads are the flavorful threads, not the yellow. So they've selected out the yellow. Those have gone elsewhere. And this is over $3,000 of saffron right here. So we are not actually going to pass this one around, but you are very welcome. I mean, I can just smell it from here. It's a very, very potent smell, and it's a very distinct flavor. So you can get the color of yellow from something far less expensive like turmeric. Annatto seasoning gets infused into olive oil. If you go to Chinatown, you'll see something that says saffron $1. That's never ever going to be saffron, but it's a safflower. It looks kind of like a marigold plant. So there's other ways to get color, but you will not duplicate the flavor of saffron. And you use very, very little saffron. So economically, it isn't all that expensive to use, and it's the only spice that has a 7-year shelf life. So I think we sell it at $8 a gram. Prorate that over 7 years, and you're talking a little over $1. So, and then I want to tell you what we put in your gift today, because we are kind of thinking about Easter coming up. So this is one of probably our top 3 sellers. It's called Gateway to the North Maple Garlic Seasoning. And
It's great on ham.
yeah, and this is the maple tapping time right now. So basically this, and it's here in Illinois, but this comes from a little company in Wisconsin that we know. They tap the maple, it gets dried out, it gets ground into sugar, and that's the main ingredient in this. And it's wonderful if you're gonna have just sprinkled over your ham. It's really great with sweet potatoes, if you're gonna do a sweet potato pie.
Pork chops.
It's just like, I just thought there's so many applications for all the different Easter dishes, so that's what we put in here. There's a little bag of the candied ginger, there's bay leaves, and I think a nutmeg and cinnamon sticks in here. So, and we also have a lovely catalog that you're welcome to have if you would like one. And we want to have questions.
Any questions? Why has vanilla become so expensive? 2 reasons. Number one, the first thing that happened about 3 years ago is a couple of flavor companies, big flavor companies, discovered that they could buy the green beans before they're cured, buy the green beans and extract the compound that they needed for their flavor or for their perfume or whatever they were making from the green beans. If you buy the green beans, it's way cheaper. You don't have to dry them in the sun. You know, so all these green beans got sold to these flavor companies and they never hit the sun for drying. That's what we make the vanilla extract out of. So now there's less black beans, and so you can't make as much extract. The price of extract goes way up. Number one. Number two, about 18 months ago, major typhoon slammed into the center of Madagascar and destroyed 80% of the crop. So if this is 70% of the crop here, 80% of that gets destroyed. Vanilla orchids do not hold up well to typhoons. So that gets destroyed, and then the flavor companies are buying the green beans, and bam, you have vanilla going up 4 times, 5 times what it was just 2 years ago. And hopefully now the new crop that's coming in, they're saying the supply is way up now, and we're getting more and more beans out of Madagascar, and the quality is coming up again. So we hope in a year or two it'll come back down. But yeah, it's a horrible situation right now with vanilla extract. The real stuff is very, very expensive. Yeah. They're also planting cacao along with the vanilla. Yes, the vanilla vines like a little shade. So in Mexico, a lot of times they'll grow the vanilla beans up or next to.
They need a host. Host tree.
Next to orange trees or citrus trees. At this time, Madagascar is tropical enough. They can grow them up or around cacao trees and make more money that way, and that stabilizes them a little bit better. Yeah. So they get a double tree. But the vanilla needs a little shade, so it's a symbiotic relationship.
That'd be a great smelling place to visit, right?
Yeah.
Other questions? Yes.
A few years ago, I read something that has been bothering me ever since about saffron, that it's all from a synthetic plant or bulb now, or at least in Spain. I didn't really understand it, but I've been curious. Does it make any sense?
I haven't read that.
No, ours definitely grows in the ground, and we know the farmers, and we've known them for 5 decades. So, but yeah, it's just like vanilla can be synthesized, and imitation vanilla is something that come out of a paper pulp byproduct. So usually people don't like the idea of things that are synthesized. But again, if you're talking about something that's one of the most expensive spices in the world, maybe there would be a case for it. We've often, when the vanilla price goes way up, there was a study, and I think it was, what's the magazine?
Cook's Illustrated.
Cook's Illustrated, and it had, it put imitation vanilla extract in cookies, and it had some baking chefs, top chefs in the country, see if they could tell the difference between the real thing and the imitation, and they couldn't. And so we sent this out to our customers saying, should we stock an imitation vanilla just till the prices come back down? And our customers said, absolutely not. We only want to cook with the real thing. So sometimes it's a hard sell to people want the real thing. So, but we're gonna look that up now that you say that. So thank you. Yeah, we're gonna most certainly look into that. Other questions? How sanitary is the vanilla? Yes, many spices have. So there's.
Yeah.
You want to talk about cleaning?
Well,
Without
a lot of
sounding-
spices
without
are
sounding gross.
grown in the third world, and they're laying in the sun to dry. Things are landing on them. Things are flying
I said without
over
sounding
them.
gross. Explain the cleaning process.
That's yeah. There's a lot of life in spices, you know. Yeah, you know. Yeah, it's been out in the sun in Madagascar for months. Most recipes will tell you to cut it open and scrape the inside out. Okay, like a banana. You know, the inside of it doesn't matter where a banana's been. We eat the inside. You know. But other spices, there are ways that we clean spices. It's fairly
4 or 5
scientific.
methods.
Yeah, the most popular way these days is we run them through steam, which is hotter than boiling water. It's about 300 degrees. That kills most of the living things in there. There's also, we have screens, big giant screens where we'll sift the spices, and any foreign material falls through the screen and the spices stay up. So there's a bunch of ways that the industry cleans spices.
When we first
But
got
yeah, these are not made in factories.
When we first got this Vietnamese cinnamon, there was, because of the war, there was bullet fragments in some of the cinnamon bark. We had to put magnets on our grinder. So the magnets, because a bullet in a grinder also not only not good for you, but not good for the machine. So the magnets would pull out the steel. So an adaptation we never thought we'd have to make.
Yeah.
So did you have a question?
Vanilla a synthetic or is it real?
Typically speaking, clear vanilla would be a synthetic because you can't, vanilla beans are always brown. And there was a case, I don't know, maybe many decades ago where people would scrape the little white crystals off the outside of the vanilla, but that would cost probably 20 times as much as vanilla costs. So real vanilla is always going to be brown because the bean is brown.
Hello, how are you? Good. I had a friend who just recently came from Grenada, and she brought me a sampling of different spices. Do you get any of your spices from Grenada?
Do we get any of our spices from Grenada? Yes.
We just didn't have time to talk about it. We ran out of time. That's
Yeah, we
always what we
skipped.
talk about. Mace
And nutmegs.
from Grenada.
These come from Grenada. Yeah, they were transplanted there by the French. Again, they're indigenous to these islands over here, and the French brought them back here, made a lot of money, and took them to a problem colony that they had over here called La Grenade. And now we know La Grenade as Grenada, and Grenada is the #2 producer on the planet of nutmegs. So yes, we get these from Grenada. Yeah? Yeah. Yeah.
Nutmeg is one of the few spices in its whole form you could probably keep for 50 years. And we didn't mention this though, but spices really only, once they're ground, they really only have about a 1-year shelf life. So if you got spices when you got married 30 years ago, it's time to get new spices, at least ground ones.
But whole spices, like whole pepper and whole cinnamon, these will last for years and years. You could bequeath these to your grandchildren because we haven't broke open the cell walls. Remember we talked about volatile oil? Volatile oil is inside the cell wall. So until we break open the cell walls, they're good for years and years. Okay? All right, we got to wrap up. Here's your presents, you guys. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. Patty and Tom are right here at the Spice House. 2 locations in Chicago, 2 locations in Milwaukee.
Let them come up.
It's walking distance. North Wells in Old Town. Definitely worth the stop. Or you got to fly out right now. thespicehouse.com. You can find everything.